I'm calling to order the Monday, April 16th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting. Ms. G, can you call the roll?
Ms. Hockenberry?
Here.
Mr. Krasner?
Here.
Mr. Puentes?
Here.
Mr. Rankin?
Here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Ms. Teets? Here. Mr. Wodiska?
Here.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to adopt this evening's agenda?
So move.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. We have adopted the agenda. We have basically, this meeting breaks into two pieces. We have a speaker series where we're going to hear two speakers, and Mr. Fuller is going to introduce those, and then we have numerous updates from the planning director, again, on you. But in terms of the main core of the business, this is pretty light. We could not push this meeting due to the fact that we must meet once a month, but hopefully after hearing these presentations, we can move pretty quickly through tonight. All right, Mr. Fuller, can you introduce our two speakers, or the first speaker of this evening,
Yes.
I guess?
Thank you. Tonight we have, with our speaker series, we have two gentlemen here, Stuart Schwartz with the Coalition for Smart Growth. He's going to talk about smart growth and walkable, competitive future for Falls Church in that context. And then we also have Ed Salzberg from the Economic Development Authority. He's going to also speak. What we were planning to do is Stuart was going to start off, and then Ed would follow, and then we'll have questions for both afterwards. We've allocated an hour for this, so we're ready to get started then.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you all very much. Stuart Schwartz, I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Smarter Growth. We are now 21 years old in May. We were formed by some of the region's largest conservation groups, Sierra Club, Piedmont Environmental Council, Audubon Naturalist Society, and others, to address these issues of where and how the Washington, D.C. region grows. So we work in the Maryland suburbs, D.C., and Northern Virginia, and we deal with land use, transportation, affordable housing, and environmental issues. They're all inseparable. I like to believe that smart growth is the unifying theory of all of it, that if we get our community design right, and we will address so many different issues that also include human health, which is getting an increasing amount of attention. But it's also very important for economic competitiveness. I feel like I'm in the proverbial taking coals to Newcastle situation because of how much Falls Church is already doing so well, and how much planning work you all have been doing. From your small area plans that you've been doing, from your bicycle pedestrian planning, your economic development marketing of the benefits of this wonderful community, and now taking on that big challenge of making the maximum use and getting the maximum benefit out of one of your two adjacent metro stations, in this case West Falls Church. So I will give a very brief version adapted for tonight of our Blueprint for a Better Region, which we first produced back in 2002. The graphics, you got tech people around here, do not laugh at my graphics. I'm getting a little older, but the younger folks in my office will be helping us update these over time. We just stay so busy going from issue to issue. I'm also arriving here having just done 3 to 4 months on the Metro campaign with the business community, especially in the Northern Virginia Chamber and others, where we fought hard in Richmond for funding for Metro. And as you know, which is great news, except it was mixed. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul in this case. To do it, we'll fix the funding in Northern Virginia one way or the other. The bottom line is to get a 3-state deal is historic, and they didn't think it could be done. So we are very pleased, and elected officials from Falls Church joined with those from the other jurisdictions to help it make it happen. So I always start with traffic. This was back in 2011. We've ebbed and flowed, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 1st. To me, it really doesn't matter. I mean, yes, it's an irritant to all of us, but whenever they publish these stories about our traffic, they never really get under the hood, so to speak, and say, well, why so much traffic? That's what we like to talk about. We're always going to have traffic in a busy, economically vibrant region. I am sure that in places in the country that are not doing well economically, traffic declines significantly. We're spending a lot on transportation, yet we still have a lot of traffic. This is a very abbreviated version of the traffic story. This is one part of the $2.4 billion Wilson Bridge. This is Telegraph Road interchange. You can see how much land it takes out of productive economic activity to move cars longer distances. They are very amazing devices, the automobile, but they have reshaped our landscape in many ways. And what we have the opportunity here in Falls Church to do is look at a pre-automobile type community that was built on a walking scale, and this is what we're trying to come back to create the right balance between the automobile and the rest of the modes in our lives. Very high costs for the community or for an individual to own a car. Even AAA, the car people talk about how much it costs to own a car. I think that's a low number. I've seen numbers higher than that from AAA as well. They update it every year. And then there's an interesting statistic here that Joe Courtwright, who's with a group called CEOs for Cities, ran some numbers and some analysis, and he thinks that like sort of the straw that broke the camel's back in the real estate bubble, and I would have to say beyond the bad loans, was the rising price of gas. Many people bought a bigger house than they can afford, too far away from work, and gas prices went up 4 times.
Interesting thought.
Massive effect on the environment. I was talking to your environmental committee chair just a little while ago. First on climate change. Transportation in this chart, this is from about 12 years ago, was 35% of U.S. Greenhouse gas emissions. It's actually become the largest source of our emissions now because we've actually made some progress on power plants. You add buildings and you get 80% of our use of energy and emissions in that. And that means green buildings and smart growth location where you can drive less will really do a lot to tackle the climate change problem. Lots of other air pollution problems and health problems from it, and also significant oil dependency. So, you know, traffic, yes, a problem. High cost of transportation when you have to depend just on cars, major environmental effects. But why so much traffic? Well, it begins with this, and I pick on Centerville. Where's the center in Centerville? It has all the components of a village or a town like Falls Church, but everything's been spread out and separated in the age of the automobile. And the roads are very wide, and there's only a couple of them to choose from. There's no grid. You're not going to walk here. You don't want your kids to try to walk here. But you see homes, churches, offices, stores, all the components of a community. But this is why so much traffic, one reason, separating the uses. Another thing is when we do it, we need a lot of space for cars. So acres and acres of parking around our office buildings and so many other places. And of course, nowadays, you're seeing that these office buildings are really suffering because people want to be, and companies want to be in more walkable urban places. We just found out today that Gerber Foods is joining its parent company Nestle now in Roslyn, coming down from New Jersey. Nestle came from California. Hilton came from California. They're all going to metro stations. And then when we create a world like that, it's a little dangerous to walk, so very few people do. And you can see the look of fear on their faces as they're crossing the road. Now, if they were hit, they would be blamed or cited, yet it doesn't tell you that the crosswalks, the signalized ones, are about a quarter mile either direction in that spot in Tyson's. Mm-hmm. You can even see that the sidewalk ends on either side of that high speed in and out from the mall. Can't slow up shopping by car. The lanes are too wide, the road's too wide, the median's too narrow. Lots of problems. That's what Fairfax is trying to fix in Tyson's Corner today. So we started talking about these issues, issued the blueprint in 2002. Predecessors of ours were talking about what we call a network of livable communities tied to transit and transit-oriented development in the region. And that started in 92 and 96 in various reports, and then we started doing this. By the early 2000s, we'd formed a Smart Growth Alliance with the development community. Some of the same people when we started didn't trust us and what we were talking about. We reached an accommodation. We realized we're talking about the same thing, and together we put on Reality Check, an exercise in 2005, 300 people, 10 tables with a big map, and we played Legos for a day. Now that would have been silly had we not had a lot of discussion too about principles and everything. Supervisor Hudgens from Fairfax is there with the former guy who went on to become mayor of College Park, playing the game. We came, and in this one, former Mayor Williams is playing the game. With a philanthropist from who was a former AOL exec and some other activists. So, preserve and protect open space, focused development, mixed-use development, jobs, housing balance, address the east-west divide, more housing choices mean basically housing affordability. Arlington had been doing it for a long time. I remember the days when Fairfax County itself considered the word Arlington a 4-letter word. But by the time of the Tyson's Task Force between 2005 and 2010, they said, we want to be like Arlington in Tyson's Corner. We want to fix that. And so you have the 2 metro corridors. Arlington started thinking about this stuff in the 1970s, about how to revitalize what they had as a declining corridor. This was Roslyn in the beginning when they started. So We had pawn shops, and you could get some oil,
Oh, yeah.
oil storage. And of course, Roslyn today and Courthouse in this illustration. Note how much green there is just outside of this. They made the deal with the community to protect the neighborhoods. They had something like 75 community meetings when Arlington did this. And putting the metro underground made a big difference. This was Clarendon when it was still a Sears store where it says Market Common, and when Freshfields arrived later and then became Whole Foods. But look how many acres of parking, and that was pretty much what it was like, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And even towards the west end, Clarendon still wasn't built out at that time. There's the George Mason Law School here. But they had a plan, much like you guys have a plan. All your smaller area plans in Falls Church, they did the same thing, working with the community, identifying open spaces, grid of streets, and where to develop. I like the oblique views. They're also more understandable. When you go to Clarendon today, you can almost see something that looks very much like the plan they came up with many years before. And then, of course, Virginia Square, again, when you can see how it steps down to the neighborhoods past it. This is some newer slides from Arlington County staff. Ballston, with all its components, and there's that bungalow that we can't afford. It's 3 blocks from Metro because it's so convenient, but it also shows that you can have both. You can have quiet neighborhoods very close to all of this. It's been great for the property taxes and the tax base of Arlington County. The 2 quarters, 11% of the land and 50% of their tax base. Now that is pre-BRAC, before BRAC, the base realignment, took all the government agencies out of Arlington. But they've funded things for the entire community out of the economic value they created in that corridor. Just like Broad Street can create all this economic value, the metro stations, and you can then invest it. So we're looking at, as well, as part of this vision of a network of livable communities integrated, linked by transit, this was our map that we took out to Fairfax County polling stations in 2008, 2009, whenever that big presidential election was, and we signed up 1,000 people to an idea about shaping the future of Fairfax based upon walkable transit-oriented communities. So it's probably less than 10% of Fairfax's land we're talking about. The Route 1 corridor, Merrifield, the metro stations, etc. Picture here, there it is. And just recently, this past month, they passed their Embark Richmond Highway Plan on Route 1. So Fairfax is trying to do this as well. Grid of streets in places like that, connected streets, a bus rapid transit line, and so forth. You all have the Route 7 transit study that is continuing. But now I'm going to come back to the Falls Church story, which we are sharing. This was one of 3 tours that we've done in Falls Church over the last couple of years. This was one of our local tours, and it's got representatives here, including the mayor, Lauren Bruce, Paul Stoddard, and others. And we walk around and show walkable urban places, what works, what's not working, and talk transportation, affordable housing, urban design, so forth. Very popular series. And last year we hosted an entire delegation in the Sacramento region who came away very impressed. They were trying to learn from us about how to revitalize older parts of Sacramento. Now I'm going to turn to some of your slides to highlight some of the things I think are the most important that you're working on. And again, you're doing everything you need to do in terms of your analyses and so forth. This came from your bike plan, and you can see the importance of the connectivity you're trying to achieve. A few years ago, I brought Jeff Speck to meet with Jim Snyder. Jeff Speck is the author of Walkable City, nationally renowned new urbanist, planner and architect. And when we did this tour around, it became very clear that the bicycle and pedestrian modes were your most important modes. The metros aren't really close by. To get to them, bicycle and pedestrian accessibility is going to be really important. But moving even within the city, given the traffic load you already have on Broad Street, that can be your bread and butter. And the good news is it is a very popular thing to have nowadays to attract people, whether they're a downsizing empty nester or a younger person. I love this one that they came up with. I call you center of the universe in this. Ashland, Virginia likes to call themselves the center of the universe. But based upon this map and a 15-minute bike ride or a 30-minute bike ride from Falls Church, as we build out the bicycle infrastructure in the adjoining jurisdictions as well, this Paul's calculation of how far you can get. So you really are the center of the universe by bike from this. And I like the fact that you're thinking strategically on the bike share. We supported your bike share application when that was made. We ran a mini campaign on that, sending action alerts and so forth, thinking strategically about how that ties in to your last mile connections to the metro station and so forth. I mean, bike share to me was a revelation when it came out. I was like, what? I don't need to worry about a lock for my bike. I don't have to worry about a tire disappearing from my bike when I come out from a meeting. I can just pick one up and go where I need to be, throw it back in the rack and move on. It really is a game changer. Walkability and bike accessibility is really important. There were some slides, and I think they're in the Nelson Nygaard study that you all had commissioned as part of the West Falls Church planning. And one of the best firms in the country with a great office right here as well. And they had some slides about the number of kids that were actually walking and biking to school. And the numbers hadn't really budged much over a long period of time. And we should be able to do much better. It's really important for human health. It's important for kids learning. It's a real sort of litmus test of how safe your walking and biking conditions are. And I think he had this chart as well showing the distances to school from where the students all live. There's a lot we can do, especially with bicycle, to make access to school better. And there's the cover of the book from Walkable City. You all, as part of the Nelson Nygaard study, they looked at the connectivity. I know that's, and that captures some of the bike, some of the pedestrian, where intersections improvements and all those things are. You all have put in for Northern Virginia Transportation Authority funding for basically a targeted approach to this area. We're going to support that. I'll show you something about that in just a second. But this is exactly the sort of analysis you have to do. I tell you, in urban planning, I think if we would only do one thing, it's get the street network right. Now we're sort of stuck because we're retrofitting now. Falls Church has a lot of the right street network. Alexandria has a lot of the right DC, the way we used to build them. You can almost let the private sector do what it needs to do to build up to the sidewalk after that, and whatever use fits. But get the street network right is really important. And of course, you all went through various alternatives. I sat in on some of those meetings, and then I see you in the final report. I think I've got the right one. This is basically the main concept you were looking at with a great green spine here. I think the final illustration with the new school that you have, I think that moved from here to here. So this is not actually the final one. And I know there was a soccer field in that version. But I think it's good to pause right here. You all heard, and I think we all saw it first in the newspaper, about the WMATA joint development proposal for the portion over here at Metro that's also within the jurisdiction of Fairfax County. Absolutely critical that be done right to make yours work as well. It should be planned as one connected community, and we're certainly willing to weigh in and help on that. We've done a lot of work in Fairfax. So it's talking about transforming places like that to places that people really like and really feel more comfortable, a better place for walking, biking, and being around. And for our environmental committee chair as well, we did a study called Green Place. We tested 5 pilot developments around the region. This is Blagden Alley, and we to basically show your big reduction in CO2 emissions from transportation based upon location, access to transit, walkability, access to bike share. And also it's important to note that if you have more affordable housing, you get fewer trips as well by car, which can be expected. So there is a greenhouse gas benefit to affordable housing right there. Obviously having lots of transportation choices is critical. You guys are all doing that here. I think this is helpful to understand your context as well. This is from the Council of Governments. And they were looking at regional core, which is by COG standard, Council of Government Standards, is Arlington, Alexandria, and DC. And then they call inner suburbs, the big ones, Fairfax, Montgomery, Prince George's, and the associated places like City of Falls Church. And then outer suburbs, Loudoun, Prince William, Frederick, etc. But what you'll see is how well the regional core does. Single driver is only 25% now and 23% in 2040. All the other modes, transit, walking, biking, dominate. The place where we have the biggest impact and problem are those very populous, what I'll call, they're really middle suburbs, Fairfax and so forth. You're getting a bum rap out of that total stat because yours is probably a lot better, and it's going to be much more like this up here. But we have to do better in this middle ring area. Otherwise, we're not going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we're not going to address our traffic congestion, and we're not going to be competitive. The same is true for all trips, so I'll skip over that. Another positive thing that I think will help, and I mentioned this earlier, For your package that you've got for the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority of Land Use and of Transportation Investments around West Falls Church, that I believe we got into our blueprint. Sierra Club headed this campaign. We backed them up. Piedmont Environmental Council did the map. It's a little hard to read from here. But we basically, in advance of both the 6-year plan adoption and further discussion about future projects of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, we are emphasizing places like Falls Church, metro stations, comprehensive investments in connected streets, walking, biking, and transit, rather than just investing in long-term, long-distance fast travel, which seems to be the main focus of the more road-oriented planners out there, that people would live very far from work, travel long distances. We're trying to shorten those distances and improve accessibility for everybody. Looking to the future, and we can talk about some of these things, the sort of next generation smart growth. Yes, trans-oriented development's the right thing, getting the mix of uses right, but that's 101 stuff. We do that all the time now. Question is, are you doing great placemaking to really create places people want to be? Parking, are you getting the parking right? Too much parking can lead to too much driving, and it's a big contributor to the traffic problems we have and affordability problems for housing. We have an affordable housing crisis. What are we going to do there? Bicycling infrastructure, you're obviously getting way ahead on that. Rob's going to help us plan for autonomous vehicles. We're having lots of conversations about what that means for our road space and for walkable urban places. Certainly, we're getting lots of development, but are we getting enough public spaces, public parks, good stormwater management? That's what's going to keep and hold people in a place as well, the parks and the green infrastructure. We still have a problem at the state and federal level about what they're spending their transportation dollars on. We're working on that. And can we be leaders in this region in fighting climate change? Arlington, when I did a presentation the other day, said, well, this was Arlington Coalition for Clean Environment, asked us, what cities and places would you look to? I put all these fancy places around the world. Then I started thinking, of course, then I had DC, Arlington, Falls Church. Why not? We really are places that are doing cutting-edge work on smart growth, sustainability, and transportation. So we're trying to create, really, it's places for people we're talking about. This happens to be Delray, DC. What's our favorite activity? People watching. But what have we built in much of our suburbs? Something more like this. And this poor kid's trying to walk to school without a sidewalk in a place in Route 1, which, again, we're going to try to reinvigorate. So we're planning for their future, hopefully a more walkable, healthy, sustainable future. Also planning for our own. I like this couple in Reston Town Center as an example. And that's really our story of smart growth, Falls Church in context, what we've been working for, and very happy to then tag team and answer questions after we get the economic development pitch.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Sit here or stay?
I think I'll sit over here so I can kind of
Sure.
face the whole
Okay.
room and not turn my back to anybody. Well, Stuart, that was great, and that's hard to follow. I had slides, but the dog ate them, so I'm just going to have to talk for some notes. So some of you know that in addition to being the Economic Development Authority, which I've been on the EDA or the precursor to the EDA since 1981. So I'm going to reprise a talk that I've given a couple times before, one to VPIS and then one to the CBC, and try to change it up a little bit because this is a little more professional crowd overall than a more general crowd. But I've been involved in economic development for quite a long time here in Falls Church. But I also run the Security and Sustainability Forum, and where we convene experts from all over the world to cover these kinds of issues. So people like Stuart are on a lot of our webinars. I've had Barbara McCann on and Complete the Streets, and a lot of folks that deal with urban resilience. We also deal with climate change and negative carbon emissions and a lot bigger issues as well. But we have a webinar coming up later in the year that is being planned, but it's not on the schedule. It's called 3 Revolutions with Dan Sperling from UC Davis, where the 3 revolutions are all about transportation. They're all about electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and shared connective, the shared connective economy. And I was just thinking as Stuart was talking that what we're really seeing is a transformation of infrastructure, and infrastructure really means energy. Energy used to be wood, and wood controlled, and wood, since it was the source of energy, really drove what the social structure was, because you had to go find trees and you had to migrate around in order to find the trees. So there were nomads, and there was a limit to the population because you couldn't be in one place. Somebody bumped into coal, and that led to a different kind of infrastructure. The social structure changed around it, and we're really talking about a transformation now in energy into a different type of energy in which there's distributed sources of energy, and so a new infrastructure, really, a new social structure really needs to develop around that, and I think that's what the dense, walkable, livable, place-based new design for urbanization really is all about. And that driver is not stoppable. It's irreversible. So I'm glad to see that we made the list, because if we didn't make the list, we have to pound the table and say, we've got to get on that list because we're going to get overwhelmed with the change in the infrastructure that's going to happen globally. So let me leave that there and then talk about what I really came to talk about, was to provide a little bit of history from a retail standpoint in Falls Church, because I have a little bit of knowledge from 1981. It's a long time to be with one organization. And I think that it could be that I could be the longest-standing volunteer board and commission member in the country, maybe in the history of the country, perhaps in the world. I've never tested that. I don't intend to. I'm just going to stick with it, and that's my pitch. And for Tim and Lindy, who've heard my talk before, I apologize if I use the same jokes. I'll try to come up with some new ones as we go along.
We'll laugh at you.
So I'm going to talk about a couple of quick things, a little bit about the EDA and what we do. And now this is the Planning Commission, so it's not like I'm coming in here saying I've got a lot to teach you guys. I mean, you live and breathe planning and development within Falls Church, and many of you have been here in this position or in the city for a long time. I mean, Rob as long as I have, and Melissa, great tenure on the committee. Lindy has been on council and been here and all across the city. Everywhere I go, Lindy is there volunteering. And Ralph has been in this position for several years, and Andy was on the EDA with me. And Tim has been an environmental steward and VPIS and Planning Commission. So you guys have all been through this in different ways, and some of you with a lot more expertise, like Rob, certainly, than I do. But I've listened to folks over the last 30 or maybe is it 40 years, but it's been a long time. So I have a few perspectives, maybe a little more from an economic development standpoint than from a planning perspective. But let me just start this by seeing where we all stand from a historical standpoint here. Would you raise your hands if you've lived here less than 2 years? Less than 5 years? Well, this is an old group. 1. Less than 10 years? Okay. Less than 20 years? And then more than 20 years? Okay, so like I said, you've all been around for a long time. When I got on the EDA, and I was appointed by Carol DeLong and Betty Blystone and Ed Strait, some stalwarts of the community, who really went back in almost into the footings, the three of them, almost into the footings of Falls Church in the late 1940s. So they don't quite go back, but they really have a history of why Falls Church is Falls Church and why it's the kind of community and village that most of us think of when we think about Falls Church. I got on the Economic Development Authority then because and there was no EDA. It was actually the Industrial Development Authority. So we had to develop it ourselves. We wrote all of the compacts and the contracts and the procedures. And I really got on because I had a vision of my hometown, Newton, Massachusetts, which really is a community. The downtown Newton Center is really a village, and there are several little villages around. But I loved the fruit store. The fruit store had, in front of the store, it had those trays out there with all of the oranges. They were all lined up like that. It was just really, really nice. And there was the butcher and then the bagel store and everything. And that's the vision that I had when I got on the Economic Development Authority then. And I realized early into this that even though City Council at that point had developed the IDA and had a thought about economic development and attracting more development into Falls Church, just because you said it and council wanted to do it, or some people in council wanted to, didn't mean it was going to happen. There was great resistance to whatever the IDA was doing at that time because of this image of Falls Church as a village, as a small community village. And you were thinking about pawn shops, and I was thinking about, well, what was the village that people were thinking about? So just 3 years before I moved here, we had the massage parlors on Broad Street
A
and
lot
then
of
down over
them.
to Wash. And I mean, they were the real hardcore stuff. And that's what Falls Church was. So I think, was that the village that we're trying to get back to and maintain and preserve? There was a big plot of open space right on Broad Street, several acres, about 4 acres, that nobody wanted to deal with. Nobody wanted to buy the space that's now the Spectrum. It was called the Anderson site, and it runs right up to where the Panera is right now. You know, imagine if someone said to you, would you have bought that property now? We couldn't get rid of it. Anderson couldn't sell that property. The city worked with them. We had an image here of a town that resisted economic development. This was not a good place to be for developers. We're in between Tyson's Corner and any place else you want to think of, Arlington. And so we had a lot to overcome. Rundown buildings, a poor image, but a great community. When the development took place in Clarendon, I just happened to work over there, and I was thinking about buying a condo, crazy that I didn't do it. But the real estate agent that was there, I got to talk with, and I said I was on the EDA in Falls Church, and we were talking about that. And she said, you know, you really are a bedroom community. If you think you're going to attract here large-scale retail, and the kind of thing I was talking about, because we were drinking some bathwater at that point about the kind of retail, you know, build it and they will come. She said, what you really are is a bedroom community with great schools in a terrific location, and those are the assets you really want to capitalize on and find ways to turn those into real economic drivers within the city. I mentioned the Anderson site, which is now the Spectrum, but if you go back, at that time, the high-end restaurant in town was the Red Lobster.
Mm-hmm.
Where was it? Some of you know, where was it?
Right.
Okay, Melissa, where
Byron.
was it? The Byron, okay, good.
Byron.
We had a duck pin bowling alley. What did we turn that into?
Pearson Square.
Pearson,
Square.
although I miss it.
Yeah, it was, no, I kind of like it.
I had a tetanus shot.
The kids had fun.
The funeral home, where was the funeral
Yeah.
home that we developed?
Northgate.
Northgate, okay, see, I was a
Know this
professional
stuff.
crowd, I stumped the folks at Vipus, or some of them anyway. So you see that we've actually really come a long way from 1981 and that period of time.
You forgot AdCom, which is now Broadway.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
You know, you're gonna be able to give this talk pretty soon, Wendy, one more time through it, and I won't have to do it.
Huh?
The AdCom building was empty for a long time.
Oh, it sat
Yeah.
there rotting.
Yeah, so the AdCom building was an office supply store, right where the Broadway is, and that really was our first development.
Former gas station, I think.
So let me spend just a second on the EDA. So the EDA, I wouldn't say was the reason why the development took place, but we were pretty instrumental in here. Council at that point, when the Economic Development Authority was formed in 2000, I'd been there in 1981, now to 2000, and that was formed because of a sale of a property, the sale of a school that was redeveloped, and there was a professional staff that was paid for at the time. But the council really started getting serious then about economic development. But we didn't have the level of professionalism that we have now on the Planning Commission, on the planning staff, in the Economic Development Office, or the Economic Development Authority. The level of sophistication has really come up over that period of time. But there was no reason why we would have known any more than we did. Planning Commission was citizens, the EDA was citizens, and we were learning at that time. I was lucky enough to be the chair of the EDA for a good share of 2000, the early 2000s. And that's when the Broadway was built, the Byron, and then the Spectrum. So the major downtown development was built there, and I got a chance to work with the developers directly. And what I learned from the developers were a set of sort of indices, the sort of precepts that are just true and important about development, what you can expect, the limits to development, and where the economic value is going to come from the development. The limitations on commercial development is generally the parking. The use that you get into the site, if it's a certain kind of use like office buildings, you need more parking, at least under the old rules, which means you'll have a smaller building, which means you'll have less economic development. The type of use also drives the economic value of the property as well. So a use that's higher end, more expensive cement, like a hotel, drives more economic value, more revenue, more tax revenue from the city. So with that in mind, you sort of have the boundaries of what to expect when you're developing the plan or approving the plan from an economic development standpoint. Now, as the transportation rules change because the infrastructure is changing, then you can probably downsize the parking, and I think that's basically the point for the development, the denser development, because you are able to change the way you manage that transportation system. So looking into the future, what do we know about retail that can maybe help inform us to guide decisions like the George Mason site? So one of the people that I thought was just most articulate about retail in the consultants that came through and talked to us about various aspects of economic development and planning as we as citizens were trying to become educated and more analytical and knowledgeable about what to expect, was Heather Gordon, who was a retail expert. She was part of several of the studies that were done, and I think the EDA, we hired her at 1.2 to do a study. And she would keep saying that you want to concentrate like retail, and you want to develop plans that are going to do that. If you take your restaurants and spread them all over the city, then you don't have a place for restaurants. So there's no great restaurant place. Personal services is another story. You don't want to go too far for the tailor or for the who cleans your clothes? The cleaner, obviously. So she advised not to try to develop a structure in which you're encouraging retail as the ground floor on every development in the city. I think we've, maybe not listened to that well, but she said because you're going to use up that asset you have, which is the amount of restaurants or the amount of higher end retail that you're looking for, that you can attract here because you've spread it out so much, and you're going to kind of diffuse and in a way waste that asset. So as we think about what it is we want to get into George Mason Square, we need to look at where retail is going from here. Sears just closed 1,700 stores. Brick and mortar stores. I mean, I buy everything on Amazon. I mean, it's just way too easy. I read a Jill report, JLL, the development firm, that said brick and mortar stores and retail, local commercial retail stores is still on the increase for another couple of years, and then it's going to start to taper off and drop down. So just looking for what the planning principles ought to be for George Mason, I think we ought to not look at what we could get now, but what is this going to look like, in 10 years, and make sure that we're setting up the buildings, setting up the retail part of the building so that we can attract in the kind of retail that's probably going to be happening then. So it's probably not going to be the kind of stores you see in Tyson's Corner, but it is going to be things that play toward a population that wants to be close to a metro, that doesn't want transportation, their own car, and that is looking for places to go during the day and at night. So it's probably services like restaurants, it could be health centers, and other things that are services to this population that is going to be developing, because I believe the infrastructure is going to be changing. No way to stop that over the next 10 years or so. So if we think about what we need to be in 10 years, because I'd say it's pretty clear where we're going, it's all the stuff that Stuart's talking about. It's walkable, livable, it's dense, and so I'd have to say that we belong on that list, because I'm not telling you anything you don't know or anything new, but we're putting in place, I think, and I think we need to continue to put in place planning procedures that are going to just maximize the potential that we have in those sites and other sites. We have about 200 acres of developable property in Falls Church overall, at $300,000 an acre, which is a pretty good target for the revenue generated per acre. You can just kind of do the arithmetic to see what the potential could be for revenue here if we were to start to get highest and best use, in all of it across the city. So let me just wrap up with, just one other last concept. So the type of retail is important. Understanding where energy is going is really important, because that's really drives the transportation infrastructure. And finally, Falls Church, from a population standpoint, is less dense than our neighbors, actually by quite a lot, even though we're at about 14,000 people in the town. So several years ago, I just did a back-of-the-envelope calculation for the EDA, where I looked at what the population density per acre is for Arlington and for Alexandria. Fairfax is so big it doesn't really work. And we're about a third less than both of those counties, for the county-wide, a third less. So we have room to grow and have denser, have more people in the city. We need more people in the city. We need more people in the city because retail isn't going to come here unless they have people that are going to buy their products. Sporting facilities or restaurants, there's going to be a limit to what we can attract in here. So in order to get the kind of revenue that we're looking for, we're going to need more people in here. And that's going to generate more revenue in itself and also attract retail that we're looking for into the community. Steve Rogers, who was vice mayor several years ago, and one of the smartest people I know in terms of these kinds of questions, said in an open meeting, I believe, that we need 20,000 people in the city. We're at 14. I think he's probably right. So we have more room for mixed-use development in here to get up to that number, which at that number, our tax rate will probably go down, maybe considerably, as our business revenues go up, in addition, especially if they're planned in a way that, we plan those developments so that we get more like the spectrum in terms of types of uses, as opposed to the one that doesn't work. I always forget the name of the large development by Pizzeria Orso.
Oh, Pearson.
Pearson Square. Okay, I just want to wipe that out of my mind
Oh,
because
it's because it
work
went,
there.
went up.
It's a
Rental.
condo, but
It was
it's a condo issue.
condo. It didn't,
Right.
that died in '08.
Right, there was a reason for that. That was designed for a condo, high-end, large, 3 bedrooms.
Yep.
So we have a lot of kids coming out of there. Okay, so, let's see, so looking back, I'd have to say, the Planning Commission's done a darn good job here. And the City Council has done a darn good job if you look across here and see the kind of development we have here. And if you take a look at Betsy Whitson's list, every month or so, she puts out a list of new retail coming into the city. It's really quite extraordinary. I mean, the new Target opened up, Aldi's is coming in. We have a new ale place. This is an attractive place, and I think there's lots of reasons for it. The location, the schools, the community feel, and I think the overall vibrancy of the community. So with that, I think I'll stop and see if there are any questions for
There we
the
go.
two of us.
Thank you, Mr.
Wow.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for either of us?
Just sticking with the point about the tax rates that you're talking about, can you, or maybe for Stuart, can you look around the region is there some kind of assessment comparing jurisdictions' tax rates and versus their level of smart growth? Are places that are adhering more to these principles have lower tax rates than places that are further out on the suburban fringe? Do we know anything about that?
I haven't looked at numbers recently, so I really can't quote any. I mean, that's why I've cited Arlington. I think Arlington and Falls Church were among the two best that we've often seen in the region. Obviously, D.C. is doing extremely well now. They're rolling in money now because of their success in revitalization. Whereas, in some of the outer jurisdictions in Virginia, you will see much higher tax rates to keep up with the cost of services, or they make a choice not to invest to the level Falls Church does, say, or Arlington does in the schools, and therefore they artificially keep their tax rates lower. I think some of the outer jurisdictions are hiding some of the level of pressure that they probably really are under. Loudon may be a different story because they've discovered that data centers don't have very many workers and with families with kids, and they produce a lot of revenue. But that's a unique situation with those data centers. But I think, generally there's a couple of thinkers on this. One guy's Joe Minicozy out of, I think, Asheville, North Carolina, done some studies about the tax yield per acre you get from compact walkable development as compared to others. There are others who've done studies about the infrastructure costs being much lower for compact walkable development as compared to spread out development overall over the life cycle. So those are helpful. Using Joe Minicozy's work, Alana McKeeman, who graduated from Virginia Tech's Northern Virginia campus in planning, interned for us, did one of those studies for Fairfax County, and the numbers were tracking for Fairfax as well, that their new compact transit-oriented areas were providing much greater tax yield per acre as compared.
Yeah, the one kind of density comparison that I like to make is Tacoma Park, which is the same size geographically as the city of Falls Church, but they have about double the population.
And they've maintained a high quality of life there in Tacoma Park as well.
But again, Arlington were much further ahead with commercial development, and they already had the solid residential, so they kind of had stuff to really build on. We had the solid residential and absolutely nothing. And our taxes are still the highest in the region.
Well, remember that Arlington, and I didn't show other than the Roslyn shot, Arlington 1970s was losing population, losing jobs, had major decay in its commercial corridor.
And then
Its primo
Crystal
attraction
City
was the
and
Parkington
Roslyn.
Mall. Well, its primo attraction was Parkington at Ballston, right?
Right.
And they knew they needed to do something different. And of course, it started with the Metro, where rather than let it go out I-66 where it's less accessible, they said, no, move it over here underneath our old commercial corridor. They spent $300 million extra, $200 million Fed, $100 million Arlington, to put it underground, and it's reaped huge rewards ever since. So that's a big long-term investment they made to make a difference. And so the right infrastructure can make a huge difference for you.
There's also economies of scale. I mean, even
Yes.
Arlington and Alexandria they're not as big as Fairfax, but they're many, many times bigger than we are.
Oh, sure.
We're more similar to the, like town of Vienna, whose taxes are, when you add in the town tax and the county tax
Right.
combined,
Yeah.
the tax burden is comparable
Heavy, yeah.
to ours. They have their own police department like we do. I mean, it's the delivery of services with only 14,000 people. I mean, we're never going to be able to probably be as efficient as the big counties that are.
Well, I think that's why the whole West Falls Church concept is so important. And now, given the knowledge economy discussions going on, I think it's probably all in those documents and all the work you've been doing on that, taking advantage of the universities, taking advantage of technology transfer, taking advantage of businesses that will spin off from those universities, I think is going to be very critical for you, both in attracting companies and young people, but, just in terms of economic development in general and tax base.
I think something that we're all going to have to work on jointly across jurisdictions is affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
It's so crucial, and people are having to move so far out. And then you get all the people driving, and there's no way of getting the good transportation for them. Like when we did the Kensington, we thought, the thought in mind was, the people working there wouldn't need parking. They live, way on out. They all come in their own individual cars, not much public transportation going on, and yeah, you've got a parking problem. But the whole thing that we're gonna need a lot less parking, with better transportation, and that's really good. Something that was interesting that Saturday night I observed that we've got to be conscious of is the congestion that Uber causes in communities. I mean, here I finally had not noticed anything like this, but Saturday night on Broad Street, with Ubers waiting for people to come out and get into their cars, the backlog and the blowing of horns and anger and everything like that was much more noticeable. I've never seen it before.
Well, DC and other cities are looking, how do you manage road space? This is public space. How are we going to balance it? You're talking the next decade, and, as we have to get ahead of this. How are we going to manage public space?
Shared transportation.
Shared transportation. Dedicated bus lanes would make a huge difference for quality of bus service, speed of bus service, the ridership. But combine that with, in a more suburban setting, combine that with having shared vehicles use those lanes as well might be the way to go, for example. But the drop-off spots is another issue you've got to deal with an Uber, just like with a bus. So you've got to figure out how to manage that as well. This is why it's such a complicated business, but it's also fascinating how all these issues of transportation and land use and the economy and housing all work together, or don't, and we have to make them work together. That's why we try to work at a regional scale, not just locally, but also figure out what the regional solutions are. One of the positives of the hot lanes is the fact that we are installing new long-distance bus services on that, and with park and ride lots farther out. So ideally, you're intercepting commuters before they come into Falls Church to a job, that they now will hopefully have a better, faster transit ride coming in than before. So that's part of that regional solution.
And one other thing that really came up with the passage of Insight down at Broad, Washington, was the fact that the Class A office space was going to bring in more workers. And the fact is, our restaurant business is not going to grow until we can get that lunch business along with it,
Right.
because it's something that's hurting all of our restaurants around. And we desperately need that. Other thing that came up, Gary was, of course, presented beautifully for us. But somebody said, where's the school bus going to pick up kids at Insight? Thought. Because we will have probably around 50 kids or so, give or take. But all these little things, but on the drop-offs and the pickups and everything like that, it's something we've thought about, particularly with Creative Cauldron, but we got to think in terms of along that line, with other things.
You'll get a chance. We get a site plan.
Hey,
Yeah, we do get excited.
you betcha.
Well, they're a school bus. They'll do what they
Broad
do.
Street.
They
along-
stop, and
They
everybody
stop.
else has to stop.
There's a part of,
Right,
yeah,
right.
on Route 7,
Right.
on the other side of 7 Corners, there's a bus that stops. I try not to be where it stops because it blocks 4
Right,
lanes
everything.
of traffic for
But that's
15
what it'll do.
minutes.
That's what it'll do.
Yeah.
But that Uber thing really surprised me.
No.
I actually had a quick question for Ed on Insight. I saw the 700 parking spaces. Given what you talked about, is that too much parking for that development?
Gary might be able to answer that. I can't answer that.
It's,
I just mean in the context of what you were talking about, that the infrastructure is changing. We're going through this major transition with planning and transport. It struck me as a lot of parking for.
Well, it probably meets code, so our code, may be higher than
We try to unpark it, underpark it.
will indeed, but I can't answer it because I haven't looked at that issue directly.
yeah, I
for
think
Insight.
they were providing
No, we
600
never make
spaces.
code on
I
parking.
think the code was probably, it was about a 20% reduction, and we'd already factored in we reduced the requirements for office parking in the past year. We did some studies and already had done that segment only of office. And so, but still, it's about a 20% reduction, and that's with TDMs included.
The developer preferred to provide less parking?
In
Always.
terms
Than was
of
required?
the commercial, they're parking that close to code. It's the residential side where more reduction. And then they're able with the office during the day to share that at night, and there's some opportunities to do some sharing of the spaces as well, with Creative Cauldron and so forth.
Right.
So there's,
A roundabout way to ask is the parking minimums prohibiting developers from being attracted to Falls Church because of the expense of providing parking when, as Ed said, we agree, is everything is changing pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
Uber, as you mentioned, we're going through this major transition. Should we look at the parking?
yeah, we think our parking, the standard parking requirements we've had for years is high. And so, like I said, we've studied particularly the office and reduced that already, and we're looking at some of the other areas as well. So our intent is to reduce it further, and we have a consultant that's been helping us with that a little bit. At the same time, the developers on the big mixed-use projects, there's some ability for TDMs and sharing, and they've come in asking pretty much to 15 to 20% reductions off, and we've evaluated that through studies they provided, and we've done some post studies, and we find that there was an average of a 71% open spaces in the parking, and this is on the residential side. We had an intern do it a year ago, studied all the mixed-use projects that, it's like a dozen of them that we've built over the last 12 years. And the average that we had for all developments was at 71%, if I recall. And I could provide that study again to the commission.
71% occupied or?
Occupied, yeah.
Okay.
And so, almost 30% were unoccupied, and we were doing night counts, so when everybody was
Right.
home during the week, and then we also did a weekend but we had 2 weeks of counts at a time that was reasonable, so forth. So we've gathered some of that data, so we're seeing that there's some opportunity to have less parking, and the developers have been proposing what they think they need to us. We've been evaluating that and then approving less parking in these mixed-use projects.
Yeah, my sense is that it has not been a hindrance. Our code is too high, but if a developer's paying attention, they've seen that on, I think, every single example, when given the proper data, have been willing to make the adjustments necessary and not made that the hurdle they couldn't clear. I think in my 10 years of doing this, only one developer's asked for the code parking, and that was a surprise. But they needed every space. It was 24-hour fitness.
But certainly, and this is probably is a challenge, but 400 North Washington, they've been wanting to build an office building for years. They can't figure out how to get enough parking spaces. Probably not just to code, but to actually make sense. So I do think, as transportation evolves, everyone can laugh at my autonomous vehicle comment now, but 10 years from now, certainly 20 years from now, we're going to have so much extra parking we won't know what to do with. So
Storage.
I'm curious, have you guys seen any developers who, if you're going to build a building today, you can't build it to have the parking requirements of autonomous vehicles in 10, 15 years, but are there any developers smart enough to build it in a way where that space becomes convertible?
Yes, I've heard that they're changing the design of parking structures to reduce that crazy ramping that they have so that they have floors that are convertible with the right floor heights.
Right. It seems like it's hard for us to change the rules too early, but if I'm going to build a building that's going to be used for 50 years, and I build some sort of part of it just for parking, it's going to be storage. It's not going to have parking in it.
Well, this is just an interesting example. So I work for the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions, and I was in Europe visiting members. We have a member in Antwerp in Belgium that built this big parking garage onto the train station because they had a super fast train line that was going to go through there. They did not need most of the parking. Right. So they actually took this 8-story parking garage, 3 of it underground, and turned it into an amusement park.
There you go.
And so there's an amusement park attached to the Antwerp train station. And they used all the different levels, and they put this spinny sliding board in there for part of it. And it was just, so it just shows you, even in Europe, which seems to usually get this what, they look at this much closer than we do in some ways. They got it wrong. And they ended up with thousands of empty parking spaces.
Well, I mean, a sign of the future is, we've been watching projects in DC just continue to reduce the amount of parking they provide until they're getting zero parking buildings
Right.
now. The one I showed you with our Green Place analysis, Blagden Alley, they really did want zero parking.
Right,
That's
right.
what they proposed they were going to do, and the neighbors pushed them to add some parking back into it.
That's what happens
but-
to us, to the
They were
neighborhood.
going to do zero parking. But, again, what I often tell people concerned about parking on one hand and traffic on the other, cars that are in parking do not teleport themselves there yet. We do not have teleport capability, so therefore they have to use your streets, your roads to get to and from that parking space. So there are benefits to reducing parking. You have to do the whole package together. You have to market it to people who want to live a walkable lifestyle. It's got to be in the marketing. It's got to be in the accessibility to bike share and to transit. The office thing is interesting because that's some of your peak hour commute problem, which is really our biggest problem, other than Saturday night, perhaps, at the restaurants. And we're trying something in D.C. to back our way into that, which is a campaign on parking cash out, where if an employer is providing free parking or very heavily subsidized parking to their employees, not only do they have to offer a transit benefit, but they have to equalize the benefit across all modes. So if you bike or walk to the job and that parking space is worth $300 a month, you're going to be given $300 cash.
Right.
Now, it may not be pre-tax cash, but we're just trying to level the playing field. And then that's only for the employees that were being offered the free parking. It doesn't, if you only offer to the top 10 employees or whatever, the highest paid employees or whatever, which is typical how they do that, which is kind of backwards, isn't it? Then those are the only 10 you have to offer this other level the playing field deal for. But what we're thinking is, in a sense, local residents who might walk or bike are kind of being discriminated against. They're not getting a certain benefit that somebody who's coming for a longer distance is. And so pricing signals make a big difference to this. I think years ago when we did that Network of Livable Community study, parking pricing played a big role. It wasn't just the transit and the transit-oriented development, it was parking pricing.
Right. Gary, do you think it might be about time to do a survey in some of our mixed-use buildings of people to see how many use cars and how many use public transportation?
I think, with the TDM that we're doing in several newer projects, 301, Tenor Hill had a basic one. You've got, a couple of others. And we have a grant right now where we have staff that'll be working on TDM measures, and I think that could be an element of that scope where we could look at that. So that's currently funded.
Gary Laporta, who works over in Tom's office and lives in
301.
Harris Teeter building, says that there a lot of people don't even have cars over there because, he tracks them down for the tax money, for the sticker. But, just the fact that maybe we are getting kind of to the cusp of that, and we really don't even know it.
The Transportation Planning Board does a survey every couple of years, and they've done oversamples when requested by a jurisdiction in partnership with jurisdiction. So I know they've done it in Arlington. They've done it in some neighborhoods in D.C. as well. They may have already done it in Falls Church at one point last cycle, but you can take advantage of that. And you can really see the difference between a walkable community and a place that's not that walkable in terms of the mode shares that you see.
Brenton mentioned the economy of scale, Fairfax County and then here, or even Arlington and here, which really speaks to places like GM, has got to be really dense. And I'm just sort of pushing to make sure that point gets across. And this is a point that needs to be communicated in the community so that people understand why things may get approved there that are much denser, because we need the additional population in order to get the economy of scale that we're talking about, or we just won't get it, and things become then not affordable. And so that's where the offsets really ought to go, is in that area. And I would say even in the inside property too, because I think that's a good place for additional density.
Well, I think this point of the regional serving versus locally serving retail is an important one. You called it something else, but the idea that Tyson's Corner, these places are going to attract the larger stores, and we're going to attract the neighborhood stores. Are things changing with things like the, what do you call it, the urban Target And I mean, is there something changing in retail
Yeah.
that is smaller,
Urban
smaller
models.
versions of regionally serving retail?
Well, I think that Target is a pretty good example of that.
Walmart has
As a s-
has something like that too. Urban, and Trader Joe's even has a urban model.
And the Target, that little Target, has a surprisingly big grocery component to it, to serve that, that area right there.
And I think the Trader Joe's one it's supposed to be a,
That's in Arlington.
yeah, well,
That
oh, do
one
they have
in
one in Arlington?
Arlington, yeah.
But they're testing one which is like cashless, and there's no people there, and you just log yourself in, and they charge, you don't even check out, they charge you for what you put in your basket, and you just walk out, you're done.
Is that Whole Foods or something? No, who's doing that? Or
I thought-
Amazon was involved in that or something?
Yeah.
Amazon has trying it, Trader
And
Joe's
Whole
has one,
Foods,
they're
yeah.
trying it, where it's just, it's all just
Is the future.
RFID on the
Currently
food.
work in retail, you should be retraining now.
Well, and a lot of this stuff I think also speaks to, we hear so much about the millennial generation, and I think the big question that will be coming probably in the next 10 to 20 years is, as this millennial generation gets a little bit older, gets a little more money, gets married, has children, do they stay with the more urban, car-free lifestyle that they seem to espouse and that they prefer, or do the pulls of school systems and the need for a bigger car to tote kids around with their stuff? You wonder, and they get a little more affluent. What will they do? And I think that's a big question mark. I mean, I've heard so much the last 10 years about the millennial generation is going to completely change, from what previous generations have done. But I don't know. I mean, that
Well,
remains to be seen.
Well,
I
the
think-
first thing is they have to get a driver's license. So my daughter, half of her friends don't have a driver's license and don't seem to have an intention of getting one.
Right now.
So I'm
but-
just saying, like, I don't,
But when they're
is it-
30 or 32
when they're
or
30,
35,
maybe they'll do it, but I mean.
Anecdotally, you're in the sweet spot for this because I think they're going to try to look for places that have urban amenities. They may not be a downtown in a major city, but they may be a walkable town like you have here. And you will, I think they know the advantages of not having to get in your car for every trip, and they've
And I
experienced
see
it.
that. I have younger kids, and I do see folks, we have a lot of exiles from slightly more urban places, Alexandria, Del Rey, Capitol Hill, Columbia Heights. You see folks that have come out here ostensibly for the schools, but you do see them choosing Falls Church because it does have a lot of the amenities that they've grown accustomed to and prefer. So yeah, I do think there's a market. I do wonder though. But there's a huge gamble on millennials and wanting to live a certain way. And
It's actually driven by the infrastructure. It's a really good example. So the infrastructure, because the infrastructure is going to change, the social structure has to change with it. So the way you look at how you're going to transport your kids is really going to change, and that's the social structure, the governance, the way you operate, the way you interact with people. So instead of looking for the SUV or the van, because they're not affordable, I mean, in comparison to the alternatives in order to drive the rest of your life, you'll look at renting one when you need one, or you'll share one with someone else. It'll drive a change in the way you look at how you interact with that.
See, autonomous vehicles is going to wipe all that out. You won't ever rent or own anything. You'll say, I need a big vehicle, it'll come. I need a pickup truck, it'll go.
Right. And
Just
it'll
make sure it has
drive
the
you
car
wherever-
seats for the
wherever you wanna
kids.
go, right.
Sure, whatever. You need
Well,
car
are
seats,
you
sure.
just, car seats will get easier to put in.
You don't need car seats because the cars won't crash.
There you go.
Well,
Well,
Also, social changes that household sizes are getting much, much smaller. We're not having as much kids. I don't know how many households in Falls Church have kids. It's
Oh,
it's
20% for
20%. It's very
Yeah.
small.
But the families we're getting some,
single-family neighborhoods, absolutely. I mean, it's rare to see a house sell, where you have folks without kids and not see a family
Yeah.
buy that house.
and they're usually 3.
Yeah.
Well, but that's also one of the advantages of building
Twins,
building
that's what
multifamily in Falls Church. If a Falls Church older resident, empty nester wants to stay in the community and wants to downsize, that they free up that house for that next family that can raise the kids there. And let's remember, the kids are probably only going to be in the backyard for a few years before they don't want to be around mom and dad, and they head out and they want to explore the neighborhood, right? So, people, it's interesting how we buy single-family homes, but when you look back, you use it from the age of 3 to 11 or something like that, and then you're out of there, right? You're on your bike somewhere else. It's interesting. Years ago, I spoke to the Falls Church Village Preservation Society years ago. And there was a gentleman there who, he and his wife had one of your grand old Victorians. And it had just gotten too much to maintain and take care of those gardens and all that, but wanted to stay in touch with the community, so stayed in that society, but happened to be living in a condo in Ballston.
Right.
And was commuting back to be a part of the community. Now you're going to be providing an option here to stay right in the community. for some-
Affordability,
Yeah.
not affordable.
Well, we are not building enough of it. It's a combination of supply and policy and parking.
Yeah.
All of those things we need to take care of.
You know, you mentioned the high school, the non-walkability up there. It's because of our affluence. And when they get to be juniors and seniors, even the ones that do want their driver's license, they're all driving.
Oh, yeah, the ones who have his driver's license drive, and then they drive the others who don't have
And then
one.
they have to have the parking because,
Does the school system price the parking?
yes.
Yes,
Yes.
it's about 300.
It doesn't matter.
I think it's 350 for the year for a parking space. It's a nominal fee, but it's enough to kind of control the access
Some
to it.
level of it.
But there's
Right.
huge parking lots full
Oh.
of kids. The
Well,
senior
and
parking lot, and the junior parking lot.
She's just saying, my daughter's driving this year. Her senior year, we let her drive, and she's driving an old truck that we have that was just in the driveway anyway. But and she can't die in it because it's so big. But anyway, it's interesting. She drives, but a lot of her friends do not drive. But then she gives them rides to school, and I'm shocked at how many of them actually use the bus.
Yeah.
Because when I would get on the metro, but I would never think to use the bus. And these guys use the bus
You
because
mean the Metro bus?
the
not-
metro
yeah.
bus. Because they already have, because now that it's all integrated, your card for the metro
Easy.
train is usable on the bus. So many of them do, and Route 7 is a straight shot through our city, and we live on the other end from the high school, and until this year we let her drive a vehicle, she would take the bus back and forth to school a lot.
I've heard of kids missing the bus and then Ubering to school.
Yeah.
Speaking
Well,
of affluence.
yeah, she has,
That's it.
she has a friend who has an Uber account. His parents have him Uber to his practices and everything.
Well, I borrow this from the former head of planning for DC, Harriet Tregoning. This is your transportation device,
Yeah.
You have your Uber, your Lyft, your Metro schedules, your bike share stations, where those are located. Everything is here, so why not take advantage of it? And it's that, what did she call that? Sort of the richness of choice or something like that you have in a walkable urban environment. You have far more options to get around that way. I was trying to get to the Fairfax County Government Center one night in the rain by bus, missed the one connection to Vienna Metro, got on another bus, ended up at the Fair Oaks Mall, and hiked on a very dark stretch across I-66 and over there. It is, and there was a lady walking out that way too with me. There was one or two other people, and you get a sense of how isolated and risky it seems to be alone in a spread out suburb as compared to being in a walkable urban place. Now, usually the thinking is different. Oh, it's much more dangerous and not safe to be in that denser urban place. I think you're much more vulnerable and you feel much more exposed without options the farther out you are. So that's important. When I came here tonight, it was red line to orange line to the 28A time transfer. It was right there, and I got here early. I got here early to meet with these guys and catch up. What's going on here? And then I got at the bus stop right across the street and realized I can't cross here. If I didn't get killed crossing there, my wife would kill me when I got home for trying to cross there. So I went down to the traffic light and back. So we
Right.
still have those issues to work
Yeah,
on.
Yeah.
that was another thing with the people crossing the street down in 100 block.
Well, before the automobile started, the streets were filled with people, horses, horse-drawn or electric streetcars, and you'll see those streets. Everybody used the street at all times. It very much looked like some countries you visit now in other parts of the world, but it worked, generally. And what happened was, because people were slowing up the cars as they got faster, GM coined terms like jaywalking and had a whole campaign about it to get the pesky pedestrians off the street. We're just trying to reclaim a little bit of that street space now for the rest of us, for bikes and pedestrians.
All right, well, thank you both. I
Thank you.
appreciate the presentation and providing us the information. Pleased to hear that we seem to be on the right track.
Yeah, thank you for telling us we're doing something
A
good.
lot of great things, absolutely. So thanks for serving.
Oh.
yeah, great development for 2000 odd, darn it all. Yeah,
I'm bringing back the Red Lobster.
the lowest performing Red Lobster on the East Coast.
Was it really?
Yes.
It was awful.
Any
That was like
Red
the
Lobsters
month I moved
perform?
in was as they were demoing that
really?
thing.
Yeah.
What year was that? Did they close it?
2004.
Yeah,
2004.
Byron,
Now
yeah,
the recipe for the
2004.
biscuits are online, you really don't have to go.
There was a big
Make 'em at home.
protest about tearing down a Burger King with
Oh,
a
of
drive-through
course.
aisle. That's where we're sitting now.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah,
I do miss that Burger King though.
It was so dirty.
Oh, it's cruddy,
You
cruddy.
could eat
Oh, the
there.
one-
I gotta
I
admit,
never went in there.
I have to go to Taco Bell.
Glad the Long John Silver's is closed too, even though it's outside our city boundary.
What is?
The Long John Silver's, I'm glad that is gone.
Yeah.
That was.
That was like the welcome, that was like, instead of a welcome sign, at the door, it was like, welcome to Long John Silver's. If you entered the city from that direction, so I missed that sign.
All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda. Miss G, did you get any petitions?
I
from
have
our-
none.
Our large crowd tonight. All right, we have no old business, no new business, no other business.
No business.
We have no approval of
Business being
minutes.
We're out of business.
Despite all the economic thriving reports, we have no business here. And any planning commission reports? It's been a month since we have met. I'm certain Lindy has something to tell us.
You make me sound like the bad guy.
No,
Where's my
You're
cohort?
everywhere.
Where's Ed? I mean,
He's gone.
Tim,
Ted,
rather,
Tim.
Tim. Anyway,
He's left you
couple
over it.
things. Gary, I'm gonna start off with the city council meeting Monday night, a week ago, when the Insight was approved. And Gary presented so well and presented all of our concerns, all the things that we listed when we approved it, which was really good. But a couple things that have really changed on it. They are providing the extra floor of commercial. Kidder has signed a contract, because I remember when I asked, when they had the Kidder up there in the drawing, I said, oh, good. And they said, well, they really haven't said they were going to do that. So Kidder has signed it for a large amount of space. The big thing still is that median strip. And they had not put into the to VDOT until just about the time when they were finally voting on it. And I really worry about that, because I don't know what will happen if that is not approved. And, and it is a huge concern. It was a huge concern for us, huge concern for the businesses over there. And, how that's going to work out. I really don't know when and if VDOT will come through with it.
Can they break ground before we approve site plan?
No.
No.
Because personally, I'm not gonna, if I am allowed to not vote for it, the site plan, until that's sorted out. That's my intention.
That's my intention. Paul, when I said that to him, he says, oh, we can work on other things in the site plan. And I said, Paul, I don't feel good about that.
We can work on stuff. I'm just not gonna vote to approve a site
Yeah,
plan
yeah.
until that's sorted out. It just ruins
I think it needs to be
everyone on
sorted out by
that
site plan,
block.
I agree, because it'll change the design, wouldn't it change the design a little bit of the
Oh,
way-
it'd have to.
Right.
If they don't get that, they can come with a site plan that has a way to get through the site. You have to be able to get to whatever that is, Park Place,
Yeah.
from both directions on
And to the
Washington.
city parking lot back there.
Yeah, so
So, I'm really quite concerned about that, and,
I'm not concerned. I just want to vote for the site
I
plan.
mean,
that's the way I felt. I even said to the
Concern for
guys
them,
there,
I
they were
guess,
all
yeah.
happy and everything, and I said, hey, no site plan until that's approved.
and question for staff, you guys, I'm sure, can find out who at VDOT is reviewing that, and perhaps you can make sure you're at the table when there's gonna be a meeting, presumably with VDOT and the developer, to talk about if it's a modification or a waiver or an access management type of thing that they need to approve. Find out, who, is handling that, and make sure you guys are there to
Yeah,
have the
yeah.
city's views represented at the table. I'm sure you.
Well, that's exactly what I did with 301 West Broad,
Right.
with the left turn lane.
Right.
It wasn't a curb cut like Northgate was, median cut, I should say. But that was not permitted, and it required a modification and waiver, and we did just that. We went and we were at the discussions. And it's the kind of thing where they're looking for us to show something to support it on our end as well. You know, the traffic consultant for the developer in that case had, so I attended that, and the gentleman at VDOT was, just as you said, looking to approve it, but needed us to give them the ammunition to do that. And by being there and being present, it made a difference. And that's what they were looking for. And so that's our intent to do the same thing here. And then Northgate, I didn't work on that directly, but that was a median cut, and we had a in-house consultant that did the warrant study for that, and that supported that case. And so, we'll have to make sure that either the developer has, sufficient study material to support it, or, we'll have to do our own, so.
Well, that's where I think I'm all for us doing what we can do, but hopefully the developer realizes that at least one person is not going to vote for it until it's done. So they should be highly motivated to do whatever studies they have to do. I mean, the alternative is they want to redesign the site so that I can get to Park Place through their property. That's fine too, but that would be a total redesign. I mean, the grade and everything would.
It'd be really great with Park Avenue aligned with Park Place.
That's never going to happen unless you can.
That's
As a
that's another.
diagonal, and it's a pretty big diagonal.
Yeah.
I was looking at it again today, but that is a huge concern. But and who knows when they will come in for a site plan too, because they asked for 5, they got shut down on back down to the usual 3 on the.
I think the
special
timing will
exception.
coincide with the site plan process. I think we'll follow the same timing. So I think we'll be fine on a resolution on it. And for what we've done before, I mean, it's all about the safety of it. And so that's the purpose of the study, and to, make sure it works, but safety is the paramount piece. But
The other thing is to make sure we start negotiating with Kaiser early on to get some more parking and to get some advertising going on about it, because that whole area needs to advertise about it. And then also any of the parking situation that the EDA is looking at, we're looking at it also for on Park Avenue. That needs to really get done, to help out.
What's the issue?
Hmm?
What's the issue that you're referring to?
Well, parking.
On
Yeah.
Park Ave?
No, parking for right now, it's wide open parking up there on the Robinson site and everything. There's huge amount of parking for all the activities up there. And when you get right down to the only parking lot is the city parking lot, that's not very much parking for those places. So to get going and get some more, agreements with Kaiser, which we have one, but it's not advertised well. And so that when it gets going, we're also going to have staging difficulties when that starts getting built. I'm just worried about the restaurants up there.
All right, we'll worry about that
Yeah,
when we get the site plan.
But anyway, EDA, Tim and I hang out there. They're interested in doing the parking on Park, so we need to be looking at going with them. And they're going to put some money into marketing for the city. And probably, Brian Williams is handling that, so probably,
Totally unreliable.
you don't know anything about it? Okay. And then also they're going to do Walter Phillips is going to do a study of all the way on up on Broad for infrastructure and with the streets and all kinds of things. It's not a whole lot. The other thing is the Housing Commission's got a new task force for looking at affordable housing. I'm on it, meets tomorrow. Are you on it, Tim? Or anybody else from here? Okay, I missed the first meeting, but anyway, they're looking for something new. And the guy from the Methodist group that is involved with the fields, the Ellison Street, came to the meeting, and he had some really interesting information that might be good for the future of the fields if it all works out pretty well to keep it affordable. But I'm
Which
not gonna-
fields?
Fields.
Across the
Behind
street
Taco
behind
Bell?
Taco Bell, that runs out of affordability in about 6 years.
Not an actual field.
Yeah,
Got it.
The fields.
but anyway,
They have lots of locations around here.
Yeah.
This Thursday, I just want to mention briefly, the ESC and the CACT are having a joint meeting, and following on the heels of our discussion here this evening, the topic is autonomous vehicles and shared autonomous vehicles. They've got a speaker from AECom, not familiar with that company, but apparently they're
AECom.
quite well known.
Big engineering company.
Big economy.
They're talking about the potential for shuttle service in Falls Church, and Dave Snyder is going to be there to talk about the lessons from the George. That's this Thursday at TJ, 7:30.
Speaking of autonomous vehicles, I had a hour or so long conversation with the chief operating officer at a company called May Mobility, which is developing a 6-seater electric autonomous shuttle that they're now trying to shop around. And I talked to her about whether or not a place like Falls Church would be practical. It was funny. She's like, we're looking for a place that's trip lengths of 1 to 3 miles and 400. It was like, describe Falls Church. I was like, that sounds like us. And then I talked with Paul Stoddard and Letty from City Council about it. It's a cool idea. The pricing is not. It's like she quoted a 1 year, includes everything. They put a guy local to manage everything. It was like $600,000 to $750,000, which seemed cheap to me. But Paul pointed out there's all kinds of, first of all, we don't have the money, and even just the planning and stuff. So I don't know if that's going anywhere, but I got back in touch with that person and hinted like, hey, you're trying to get this started. We could really work with you. How about that's $0 instead of $600? So I'm waiting to hear back, but it's probably a long shot. But I did pitch the fact that if they deployed their shuttle here, they could bring their Congress people out to ride it. It'd be kind of
Like National Harbor.
good showcase. So we'll see if that goes anywhere. But I when George was still here, I remember like the cost was crazy. Like you literally could have just paid for everybody to take a cab and paid less. But it was also like a huge diesel bus rumbling around.
Mammoth bus.
Well, they had electric buses for a while. It didn't work.
Yeah, well, that was a while ago. So I do think like some sort of a shuttle service, especially this solution ultimately would be a point to point. So you could walk out your door and say, send me the bus, wait 5 minutes, it would show up, go anywhere in town you want. So there's a lot of potential there. I don't know how long it will take us to get our act together, but again, 10 years from now, everybody will have these things. So it'd be cool if we were one of the first.
And you've got your,
Oh, yeah, that's right. I emailed it around to the commission. I think I copied Paul on that. On April 24th at 7:30 over at Longfellow Middle School, the county is hosting a task force meeting on the West Falls Church comprehensive plan amendment that was proposed by WMATA. It's like the first stage in the county's process, the first formal kind of meeting. Then there'll be a planning commission hearing, and ultimately the board could be multiple planning commission hearings and the board of supervisors. But this is the kind of the local task force getting community input on that. So I thought it would be interesting, at least at a minimum, very interesting for us to go. If not downright, vital for us to be there and hear what not only about the WMATA proposal itself, but to hear what the community around there has to say about that proposal. I know there's been some hesitancy on the county side for something as dense and grand as what WMATA is proposing on their side of the boundary. So it'll just, I know it'll have implications for what we're doing. So I'm going to try to go, just at least to listen, but certainly anyone else can go. I don't know if staff has been, I know you've been talking with the county at least a couple points in time about this, but just to stay abreast of it. And as it works its way through, the various steps in the process, I think it would be very wise for us to continue to stay involved there. So that's April 24th, 7:30 at Longfellow Middle School.
Anyone else?
I've got one question for Gary, if I could. Have the plans for ends of Virginia changed? I've heard something.
So, yes and no. They've come in with potential, first it was to do just the renovation, basically scrap the site plan and just try to renovate the existing building. I think they've realized that that's too costly. So now they are looking again at tearing down and rebuild, but maybe there was talk of condos possibly. I think they're still very much.
Condos that people live in?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's.
Instead of just sleep there?
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
not
so I
like
think there's
office
still,
condos. we're
No,
talking
no,
about
no, yeah,
residential.
residential. I think they're still trying to figure out what they want to do. They switched to's kind of in charge of that now, the project manager, different brother.
Change.
So,
That's why I asked, because I heard that and said, huh?
yeah.
guess
So
they-
basically, they still have the site plan that was approved. That's still valid for another few years, so, but yeah.
What happened with that? Is that I know at first they were looking for a brand, and then they said they were just going to be independent. Is that basically they just found it too difficult to move forward with the hotel concept?
I think maybe, I'm not sure. If it's the hotel, they still want to do, a portion hotel at least, or an entire hotel. But as far as how much they want to do, maybe they want to try to do more rooms, get it more profitable, but they keep bumping up against that.
Not enough parking.
And we're trying to tell them like 30% reduction was very big. Like, I don't foresee planning commission approving anything beyond that. So, so we'll see what they end up doing.
I wonder, now we've talked about parking tonight. I mean, maybe it's worth looking at it again. I mean, I don't usually go to a hotel having a car with me, but, I now with Uber, I really don't bother to rent a car most of the time.
Well, and the problem too is the site itself is so narrow, they can't do a parking structure.
Right.
Right.
So physically, to get parking spaces to where it's even feasible to do, and enough hotel rooms, and what they're trying to do, it's gonna be that, the latest concept too was also to include a diner, restaurant type component. So that's another added parking use, so.
But maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like the Hilton Garden Inn's parking area is pretty empty a lot. So,
It is often empty.
yeah, so I think that kind of proves that maybe we could do more than a 30% reduction. I don't know. I don't think I would say to them, no, we won't do more. We would do, I think if they looked at what's going, maybe they should go over and study what's going on at Hilton Garden Inn and come back to us and say, hey, we noticed that they're only using this much parking. Can we have 40%? I don't think it's unreasonable for them to ask us that. I mean, it is different. 10 years ago, if I went on a business trip, I'd rent a car. Now, I almost never do. Unless I'm in the middle of nowhere and there's no other way to get somewhere. But anyway, just something to think about.
All right, let's move on then to the planning director's report. You have quite an extensive report.
Or at least a lot of attachments.
First of all, we have Carly Aubrey here, and she was going to talk about urban agriculture. And I don't know if you want to do that now, or you want me to just go through my items and then we'll do that.
Whichever makes sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't, I don't have a strong preference, whatever you think makes sense.
Okay. Well, hopefully the memo that was provided gives enough detail to explain what we're trying to achieve here. The city adopted a resolution last year for the Healthy Eating, Active Living campaign, which is part of the Virginia Municipal League initiative with the Institute for Public Health Innovation. And if you go on their website, there's 3 major themes. One's workplace wellness, and then another is active communities. And then the third is the promotion of access to healthy foods, which an example of that is urban agriculture. So on a personal level, I've been following the urban agriculture trend for several years now. I worked on an ordinance in the city of Stuart, Florida, and a couple of years later, an urban farm opened, and it has been the economic boom to that city. It's incredibly popular. They have a cafe, they have restaurants, they have summer camps.
Can I ask a quick question? So urban farm, it's just like a block of land, or do they do it on top of buildings, or how does it work?
The one in Stuart, they do some in the ground farming on the portion they own. Adjacent to it is city-owned land. They lease a portion of it and do vertical hydroponic gardening.
Outside?
Yeah. And then, but there's also, the memo talks about some local examples. Up Top Acres, which is DC based, they own several rooftop farms in the DC area, including Pike and Rose in Bethesda, Maryland. And that particular example is almost 20,000 square feet of rooftop gardens that they then sell the food to local restaurants.
Right.
And then they also have a community-supported agriculture program with the residents. So that development is owned by Federal Realty, which they want to do it more. They want to do more of this type of rooftop gardening for future developments. So we definitely have the opportunity here to encourage something like this. Memo also talks about the benefits of urban farming, and then it also ties in nicely to a lot of, Stuart had mentioned, planning for health that's really has taken off in the last few years too. Communities really looking at how they design their communities for the health of their residents, and urban ag falls right into that. Some of our existing comp plan policies already support community gardens, and urban farming could help further some of those other goals. So, and then I've listed just a very few potential goals and policies for urban farming. If you look, there's lots and lots and lots of information out there. Depending on where you're at, kind of dictates what you want to do. Cities like Detroit and Cleveland, who have a lot of vacant lots, they do a lot of community garden plots. We don't have so much of that here. I think the real opportunity is in our mixed-use developments, doing the rooftop gardening or small areas, and then also the existing apartment buildings we have, encouraging them to do community garden areas for their residents. The WNOD is a potential option. I have talked a little bit with
People already do
staff
that.
there. There's, license agreements and things you have to worry about with that, but it's a
the
possibility.
WOD, what are they now, Nova Parks?
Yeah.
They're not really interested in doing that anymore. They're trying to get out of that business.
Right.
Yeah, it sounded like it would have to be very,
They just don't have the
well-managed
personnel
and-
to manage it, and they're, and their park is so long.
yeah.
They're,
Well, that's what they
I
had
kind
kind
of
of
had a
told me,
big
like,
discussion with them about
it
it.
would need to be
and they're
maintained by,
like,
not them.
Yeah.
And some of our paper streets are already being used for such. Big question, does our code for single-family residences, does it cover being able to put a vegetable garden in your front yard? I don't think so.
It doesn't
It's gonna
prohibit
stop
it.
me.
Yeah, it doesn't
People do.
explicitly prohibit
I know.
it, so.
There's a
and I
vegetable
think-
garden in North Virginia. It's in the
Yeah.
front
What about
yard.
chickens? What's the city's rules on backyard chickens?
Here's my advice. It's a
We have-
don't
we-
ask,
We've
don't
got
tell.
chunks,
We
we've
have a
got
bunch. On
chickens,
Fulton Street, on the corner there,
Yeah.
in Pennsylvania, they have
but I
chickens.
think we've got,
On West Street.
There's
there's
code against
Renner-
There's
it.
somebody on city council.
My daughter.
yes, I know somebody on city council
My
has
daughter
chickens.
did some research and claimed that our house, they could keep chickens here, but you had to get permission of the city manager. So she wrote Wyatt a letter,
Wait,
and he said no.
So we do not allow any chickens?
No.
We
at all?
technically do not
No.
allow chickens.
We
So
technically
they
don't.
suggest you don't let them out of your yard.
Wyatt suggested don't ask him because he
Yeah.
has to say no.
No, because it is illegal, but
But that the penalties for having chickens are low.
you
so-
also can't have goats. Someone tried to get goats and they couldn't have them.
You know what's on the menu then.
One of the things I wanted to show you, because when I was talking about the vertical garden, there's when people think about vertical garden, they think of these big installations and all this stuff. But like, here's one I thought was really cool. I don't know if you've ever seen. It's just a simple wooden one.
Yeah, right.
Like this, guys. So I was thinking, like, you know how we do our rain barrel workshops, and it would be cool to do a vertical garden workshop, because if you have a patio that has any kind of sun, you could put a vertical garden in like this.
And
And then, like, for me, in my yard, I only have a ribbon of sun in between the trees and the house. So everything I want, like vegetables, have to be in the ribbon of light that I have. It's like this one southern exposure strip I have. Although now we had the storm took one of our big trees down, so I might have more ribbon now. But anyway, but I just thought this would be kind of a cool thing to add to like some of our classes. Like where people could, because this is
Be a privacy fence too.
well, that's true. I mean, but I mean that's a simplified version of it, and because most of the vertical gardens you see are hydroponic or something really cool on top of an urban rooftop. But there are like simple ones like that we could
And that's what
promote.
we've got up at the high school.
Yeah, like we could just promote something a little bit smaller.
Yeah, so that would be as part of our next steps is to seek feedback from some of the boards and commissions that might have interest in it. As
But
far as the
don't talk
planning-
about chickens.
Right, I know. As far as the planning commission,
Chickens.
if we were obviously to recommend any comp plan policies or ordinances, you guys would obviously see that. So we are supposed to report back to city council and provide some recommended actions. The thought from our committee is to propose that a community needs assessment is done to better understand what role urban agriculture could play in the city, from education for smaller things like the vertical gardening you were talking about, to the rooftop gardens for these mixed-use developments.
We used to have a community garden up by the high school.
Yeah, that's what Danny had told me.
Yeah,
And then after that, to prepare a food action plan, which would be to include actual regulations that should be adopted, comp plan policies. We're getting ready to update our natural resources element chapters.
Thanks.
That'd be a perfect place to add this. It's an example of green infrastructure. Look at potential sites, partnerships, and funding, and then obviously the allocation of staff resources. I personally would love to do it all the time.
We have a volunteer. Well, we are the healthiest city in the nation, so to not
Even
have this
healthier.
on our.
So got rid of that Burger King.
Well, just from the health violations alone.
Related to that, there's something called a well building standard. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a relatively recent certification, and I heard a presentation 6 months ago at Council of Governments, and I thought, nobody will do that. Well, it so happens a company in the city, Macron, they're a consulting
Oh,
firm
yeah.
in the tax analyst building,
Right.
has the first well building certification in Virginia. So I went over and toured their building the other day and talked to them. And so I think we're going to try to do a little recognition for them at an upcoming city council meeting. But I think that fits right in with the same thing that you have
That's
there.
gotten all
It's the
kinds of
well
awards.
building standard.
From an economic development perspective, that rooftop, the up top acres, and that building in DC, they rent that space out for weddings, happy hours, so it brings in money, because it's a neat attraction.
Good stuff.
Great. Thank you. I think a needs assessment is probably the next step, as you indicated. I don't know how that begins, and is that funded through grants, or where we go from there? But it's certainly intriguing, and doesn't look like it's going to take up too much land that we already have. So seems like a good idea. All right. What's the next item here in terms of your report?
Yes, the planning commission gave you a copy of the work plan here. That's been updated post the March 5th planning commission session you had. And it also includes the updates that we talked about on the comp plan for the two chapters, the natural resources, environmental sustainability chapter, as well as the housing. Those are on the back side. This is a quarterly schedule, so it falls in the second quarter of this year. If you look at the front, brought in Washington, council's finished with the SC on that. I would anticipate the 3 to 4 months, we'll probably get a site plan in. Then it'll be about a 3-month process on that. In terms of Founders Row, we're wrapping up a round of final site plan comments back to the applicant. They had gone on, we'd given them a full review a year ago. They went on hold and then reactivated in the last, I don't know,
Couple
30,
months.
couple months, 60 days. And then the SC amendment is pending the theater lease, which seems to be coming in the next week or so, according to correspondence we're seeing. So I think they're finally wrapping that up. Then we have a recommendation on Oak Haven right-of-way vacation. You'll get more information on that. Be a first reading coming up with council and referral to you guys on that. So in terms of some of the immediate items that will be coming up, those are highlighted on the first page. So if you look at the dark green, that's the work that's ongoing, being done now. The light green is either some follow-ups needed or there's something pending, next step, application, so forth. So that's the difference in the two colors. So if you've got any further thoughts or refinements on this, let Paul or I know. And any thoughts tonight? This will be
Round, you could probably move out 2 years on the Founder's Row,
yeah.
but otherwise, no.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm
we'll
not,
see.
you know,
I did have a question, and maybe, Lee, this is something you would know. On the West End Small Area Plan, it seems like, that's kind of slipped in terms of the kickoff now is third quarter. Wasn't that long ago when we thought it was going to be done mid this year. I'm just curious
Right.
if there's some thought behind having that be pushed off at a later date.
I brought that up at the last meeting too. I'm concerned about that.
Yeah. I guess, I'm not sure exactly. I know Jim Snyder has been working on this and the timing, and there were certain reasons that with everything going on with the campus site that I think some things were swapped, but I don't recall the details, so I'll have to get back to you on that. But it's something that was more purposeful than omission, so.
I gather it's not, am I right that a small area plan is not technically part of the comprehensive plan? That from that perspective, it doesn't have to precede the zoning, whereas normally you would want to have your comprehensive plan
That's
in
correct,
place
yeah.
before you do the zoning.
Yes. Yeah, we haven't, the area plans aren't at a level that have been adopted as part of the comp plan once we've completed them. The process that we envisioned was that once we collectively got them all done, then we would consider that.
Yeah.
But I think in order to keep things moving and to not get bogged down in too many fine decisions, we wanted to keep that process moving, and so we wanted to put off the comprehensive plan adoption sort of to keep things moving rather than get bogged down. So
I see that the city council has, I think it's their May 7th meeting, has zoning. It's a work session. But we haven't scheduled it.
We
for us
haven't
yet,
even
right?
talked about it.
yeah, so
Yeah, and we're meeting, staff is this Friday to talk about the wording, the actual amendment language. And so we'll also be talking about schedule for getting it in front of you in May. We could do like the end of May, if we go to them in May 7th, then we could try to come to you guys the next available meeting for a work session.
So you could actually go to them first before here?
Or we could try doing, we'll have to talk schedule, could be a joint, but.
Yeah, it's one of those
Look to
things,
the veterans here for.
it's one of
for
those
help.
things that should've, could've,
Yeah.
timing-wise, should've been here and then gone to council. But time-wise, we're running into it. You know, I raised that concern last time about the fact that we've not gotten that site plan done. That really bothers me, that we're kind of always doing a site plan after development. Which
Yeah,
it's kind of weird.
we're in a chicken and egg problem right
Yes,
now.
we
where
are.
We have to decide which is most important to go first and timing wise, so.
But
I
is
get-
that
I
going
get
to
that.
hinder us
Doesn't
in
make me
any way
happy.
up there?
I think developers will still be able to, propose what they need to with enough guidance in the RFDP. If we can at least maybe get, we'll have it drafted and we'll have it, the small area plan won't be approved yet, but at least for the sake of predicting some level of density, I think they can.
I think there's things floating out there about density and everything. I think we're pretty all, dense.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
We've not acted on
Right.
zoning. That's been floating around. Even density. Just there's stuff that's floating around that I think the planning commission should have gotten under tow.
Yeah, because what's gonna happen instead is it's gonna have to be hashed out during work sessions and public meetings and.
So that ship has sailed. Should we skip
Yes,
that one and go to
ship
the
has
next one?
sailed.
I'm just saying, like, this is what happens every time. We're like,
Yeah.
We missed the boat. Let's spend the next year working on it, and then we'll miss the next boat.
Yeah, and I'm very, well, it just is concerning.
Well, the only thing that concerned me is the Weston small area plan is not that big of an area plan. It's not that complex. We kind of already know what we want to do there because we've been working towards it.
Well, wait, does
With all the-
the West
No,
End
are you
include?
talking just about
It
the,
includes the buyer property.
yeah,
and-
yeah. that
Yeah, but
includes all-
I guess I kind of feel like we've had several reports on that area. Well, you know, you kind of look at it from the outside and you think about all the reports we've already done and all the work we've done there. We kind of know what's going to be. I think it's a little bit less complex than some of the other areas, but then you get into it and we could end up bogged down, and I guess we just don't want to get.
I mean, I
bogged
guess
down
the
in that.
reality is we should work on it, but I mean, I think what we're really doing is trying to shape up the buyer stuff and the
Right,
Fritz stuff, because the high school site's gonna be sorted out before we can finish that.
right.
Yep.
Exactly.
But there's more to it, so maybe we see what's developing there and that influence. Otherwise, we should skip it and go to whichever other area plan we haven't done yet, because we're not gonna ever get ahead of the development on the high school site.
I don't think it matters at this point.
Right, so I'm just saying, I do think it's worth doing if we really focus on those other areas, but otherwise, what is the next one?
But we should be part of the zoning.
I think by law, we're required to be part of the zoning, right?
Yeah,
We
but
have
we
to
still
be.
have to do the zoning no matter what, so.
But we have some time on that piece. I mean, we've certainly indicated, I think very clearly, that it's B2 is what it's headed towards. And it just hasn't been formally done, and they're not gonna break ground on this thing for years, even if when they do submit the proposal. That's become less of an issue. We've been, I think, really clear about where we're gonna head with that. I don't think there's so much concern by a developer. I don't know, I'm just guessing
Well,
about.
have the zoning
You
somewhat
gotta.
in place in order otherwise they can't really submit a plan and show that it conforms to the zoning.
Right,
because the zoning
right.
is.
Wanna have this
Right.
debate
And
again?
for
Can we have this debate
the
again? We've debated this 100 times.
possible
Yeah.
FAR.
Right now, it's still zoned what?
And we
R-
can't have this debate without Jim
What is
and
it
Mike
zoned right
about.
now? R1A.
It's
It's
required.
zone R1A, right.
Well,
It's not zoned, but by
the
default,
zoning
that's
is a
what it is.
planning
Well,
commission. thing,
every
staff
area has
issue.
something, by default, it's R1A, so
So when is that on the docket for the,
just as a.
May 7th, work session for the city council,
Is what's on the docket?
the zoning for the 34
Property.
acres.
To zone it to what?
So it's
that's it.
the B2 text amendment. We have to amend the code to create a new special exception category, basically, with the intent that then we would rezone the land B2. And then developers would apply for special exception. That's basically for that site.
So that definitely has to be in place.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, so I can kind of see, like, if the area plan has been pushed off because we need to do this other work first, I get that. But,
The text amendment will come here after the city council, right? It's got it, yeah.
Any other comments about the work plan? I can talk to Paul as well. We speak each week about the schedule. I can
I
talk to
just-
him about that.
I guess I wanted to, at the last VPIS board meeting that we had, came up, people were asking about the downtown plaza, which being redesigned.
Yeah, it's being, I forgot to mention that in my report.
Well, no, I know it's being redesigned so that there's less, we're taking less parking spaces away. And I guess also that when they put the RFP, what came back was more expensive than
Oh,
they could
yeah.
afford. So they're trying to bring it into a certain cost and put some of the parking back. There was a
Cheaper
feeling
materials.
that there wasn't enough public process, and that's why this whole thing came out at the last minute with the, I know, there was, but there was a feeling that for all those businesses suddenly come out at the very end and be very upset. So I was just questioning, my question is, do they have a public plan in place for how they're gonna put this new redesign out? So, are we gonna have public meetings
Well,
for
they're
planning
hoping not to have to
commission?
come back to to planning commission.
Well, if it's a big change, and it sounds like it is, I think they need to have public meetings again. So how are they gonna accomplish that? And I personally think the planning commission should see it, if only to give the public a chance to see what this new design looks like.
I could speak with Public Works. I know they've been talking with, obviously, EDA, but then also the neighbors to make
Right.
sure that everybody's happy, so.
I mean, if they're basically taking the project and just lopping one piece off of it, I guess it's not that much of a change, but I still think it needs to
There are a
be.
lot of changes.
Okay, then there needs to be a public process for it.
Don't you feel, Tim, that there are quite a few changes? Or
Yeah,
like-
it's basically downsizing though.
Yeah, it's all downsizing, but cheaper materials.
Watering down.
Yeah. Well,
Literally watering down.
Jeez.
Anyway, so that, I just bring it up because at least some of the people that I've been talking to are like, well, when will we see it publicly? And they're concerned it would go to RFP without being a public process to show what the
They should
changes
go to
are.
the next EDA meeting, tell them that.
It's already gone out to bid
No,
again
but they're
for
talking
the
about a
second
general
time.
public
No, I
process,
agree, but
not
if
just
someone-
people who go to EDA
Well,
meetings.
no, I agree, but I'm saying if you talk to someone, you can say, hey, you could go to the next EDA meeting. I'm sure you can get information there.
Well, I said it should be up on the EDA's page, but I don't think it was, so there we are. But, I mean, that's the other thing, if
Not a
you're
lot of
not
people
gonna
at this
have it, you have to
meeting
get the
either, so
documents
it's
up,
not exactly-
so people can see.
Ruining the illusion. Don't turn those cameras around.
I'll talk
Okay.
later about that.
All right,
Next
next,
item.
West Falls Church. On March 14th, there was the industry forum, which we rolled out the RFP prior to that and then hosted, it was, I think, head count was about 50 developer interest that were there in attendance, so it was well attended. This outlines the process, the requested elements, also the schedule, and so we wanted to pass on a copy of that in case you weren't.
I was there. The developers were very interested in the potential infrastructure improvements from the transportation grants and how much that would be worth and
Yeah.
basically how much that would save them. So that does seem to be key to
I-
what some of the thinking.
I shouldn't wonder,
I
yeah.
can understand that.
That
And they
was-
also did, half of them hate the idea of having a practice field adjacent to the site. But there was some talk about, so on this thing, they don't like that there. But there was some talk about, that one guy said, hey, I don't care, you give me more frontage on Leesburg Pike and you can put a field on the backside, so, anyway. That'll be fun to figure out.
But like,
Well, they're gonna figure it out.
Well, they
Yeah.
gotta hurry, because schools are doing stuff too, so this is.
Yeah.
right. Well, I guess so
That
there.
field is on the school side.
Yeah. I was gonna say they can't tell the schools they can't have a field there.
It was pretty clear, there's gotta be a field somewhere, so
Yep.
Yeah.
the developer
So-
can figure that out.
So they're thinking about like if you move the building and back and a field goes this way. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that's just what one guy said. Because I think for them, Leesburg Pike frontage is valuable. And I think the schools are probably hesitant because you gotta get access and whatever, but.
So we have Lee here,
Lee probably knows way more than I do.
and he's been working on responses from the developer interest have submitted their questions. And so he's been circulating with staff and we've been assisting and answering those.
A lot of the questions are about roads, egress, ingress, where buses are going to go, how much parking is needed, the intersection between the school and the economic development site. So it's been helpful to have the planning staff kind of weigh in on some of those projections, but we might not know more about that until the design RFPs come in for the schools in mid-May. So.
One
Yeah.
question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, I'm just like on these diagrams. I mean, it is showing. I guess this is supposed to be a new road bed that comes through here. Is that because I've
It's all
been meaning to ask
conceptual.
that and I keep forgetting. But in the concept, because if we could cut into that road on the side, on the metro side, that would be so much more pleasant than what we do right now.
That
Yeah.
is totally wishful thinking.
I think it is too, because I was the grade there.
I mean, at the
land
meeting I was
grades
at,
there are ridiculous.
Dr. Noonan's answer was this thing labeled 27 is essentially the road that's there now, and the schools expect that access to be there always.
Right,
So
but
that's where the buses are going to go.
yeah, it would be definitely better, in my opinion, it'd be better not to have 27, and be able to come in the other road and come in that side, because that entrance is too close to the light. I don't know if anyone goes in and out of MEH and
It's a
George
great way
Mason
to
now, but it's a
understand,
nightmare.
It is. I'm gonna get
And
killed
it's
there
why, it is
someday.
why a lot of kids aren't biking. I mean, I know kids who tried to bike to the high school and got hit.
They should have Ubered.
Well, that doesn't help America.
Yeah, that's gonna be a problem with the school, development coming in, and that's gonna be a set feature that then the commercial developer is gonna have to work around, with, accesses and stuff like
Yeah.
that. That's gonna be quite a deal. And there's just the whole deal of fitting in practice fields up there. You gotta replace that one. It's just, I will send to you, everybody, it was kind of cool, the kids up at the high school did a CAD design of layout for the new school and some public places. It's very simple.
Save
but
us
at
some
least-
money. Use
least-
that.
At least they're, a little bit of involvement, and I hope they get some more involvement in it.
Customer driven.
It's real cool.
Why
I
is
mean,
this
it's-
school all cafeteria? I don't understand.
Yeah, that's all they was, cafeteria.
They went to cafeteria and they went outside patio
And
places.
it has a Starbucks in it? What is going on?
Okay, any more on this update?
Nope, that was, we just wanted to give you that material.
Had the
so.
happy dogs the other
If you
day.
want to talk about when you guys want to see the RFDP and what that looks like,
Sure.
is that your next meeting or a joint session with council? I know the EDA was talking about maybe doing a joint session or work session, but what's the preference of the planning commission in terms of just bringing it here?
Specifically, what are you bringing here?
A drafted RFDP.
When is it publicly released?
We're thinking mid-June.
Draft RFP,
Sorry, request for detailed proposals.
the more design, the extensive design. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
You guys want to see this? At what time? As part of that other group, which I can't remember the name,
Coordinating committee.
Campus coordinating.
Campus
Committee.
Coordinating
Coordinator.
Committee. I will see it, but does anybody else want to?
It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
a CCC.
CCC?
Triple C. There you go, call it triple C. I'd like to see it.
I would too.
I would too, although I will have access to seeing it through other channels, but I guess it would be nice to.
So when
come
would
here.
it come before us, prior to it going out to the public?
Right.
Draft, and we would, how does that work? We go into closed session or something? I mean, when you, I guess I'm just not
I
following.
don't think we're allowed to go to closed session or something like that, are we?
No, I don't think so. It would have to be
How does it work? How does it-
property-related sale
Once we
or
see it, it's
some
public.
legal
I don't know
matter.
if we can see it.
Yeah, I mean, is
Well,
it,
once- I
can
mean,
the draft
you guys
go
will
out
see
in
it
the
in public.
public,
I
or?
didn't know this was a
I'm
private
thinking
meeting.
well, at least that's how the conceptuals worked. It went out public
Yeah.
before it was released. So I don't know. I guess I'll have to check with Wyatt to see like if this detailed version would
So why don't-
have follow the
So why don't we
same.
check on that, and then if we can schedule it, maybe second meeting in May or something, or 1st of June.
Okay, well, it sounds like we'd like to see it as long as we can view it without harming the process.
Yeah, talk with the architect for the high school.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how the
No.
CCC is
Yeah.
gonna handle that either.
Right.
Okay, I guess that's an overall question.
We're also,
Communication.
I mean, just, enterprising developers will show up at these 7 a.m. public meetings, is what I would say.
No one's that crazy. Anything, do you have any other questions for us, Lee?
I think so.
And the next meeting for those who do want to attend is 7:30 on the 23rd, maybe? Does that sound right?
Yeah,
20.
the campus coordinating committee.
the triple C.
Oh, on the
27th,
23rd?
27th, I'm sorry. I
That's
Triple
your
seven,
meeting?
that didn't sound right, yeah.
27?
think it was the 23rd last month.
And that's in the morning, right?
That's 7:30 a.m.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Week from Friday.
7:30 to 9,
I'll have to. I'm
right
gonna-
here in this room.
Oh, goody. I've been working a lot, so.
I'll be
working a
there.
lot Before,
RP Square.
Actually, this is on a personal note. I need to leave early
Okay.
consistently because you've managed to put this meeting every time on another meeting I have on the same third
Sure.
Friday.
Call you.
Is there like a phone that I can just call in for the last 20 minutes that we can set up? And not that I need
For
to
sure.
talk, but just so I
Yeah.
can hear it as I'm driving to my next meeting.
Yeah.
That'd be really helpful for me. But I don't have to leave till at 8:40 or something like, so almost the whole, just the last 20
Okay.
minutes. Okay.
All right. So the next informational item you were given was the Business and Real Estate News Bulletin that is put together quarterly by our Economic Development staff, Becky
It said
Witzman.
monthly, but,
Yeah, it's given, yeah, I asked to have that
Yeah,
to this
yeah.
group.
And so,
Yeah.
you know, this is the latest quarterly one, and you can see the opening soon items, and so, anyway.
Wishful thinking. I mean,
Well, I think the Northside Social will,
there's zero
There's a
chance that's
backside
May,
to it.
you know, but
Gary?
not April, but,
There's a backside
It's
to it
looking
that
better.
you didn't print.
oh, we didn't print the backside?
There's a
we got
backside.
the PDF.
No, we got it.
Did you?
Yeah, see?
Well, his doesn't have
Oh,
it.
I don't have it, yeah.
Well, ours has it.
Okay.
Our
Okay.
electronic version has it.
I
Okay.
look forward to
See?
going
It
to
has
a-
Northside
These
Social
Audition all work.
sometime in 2018.
Yeah, but there's another side.
Sometime in
Yeah.
2018 is my guess.
Side.
and I'm trying out Orange Theory on
Okay.
Thursday at 5 a.m.
Stuff.
So
And
I will
that's
give you a
I'm
report.
trying to be sound asleep at 5 a.m. on Thursday.
God bless you.
Has anyone heard, like, now that the Lincoln has gotten Target to fill that space, are they getting any movement on some of their restaurant space?
There's been some inquiries.
We just get a really good steak restaurant.
No large restaurants that I've heard of, some small stuff.
Steak, is that
And,
Like
Getting
a
the
good
bake
But
steak.
shop.
the one large place, space down there.
Gordon loves steak
Should-
restaurants. We have to go other places.
yeah, there's been some tenants looking at that, but it wasn't restaurants that I recall,
Yeah.
so.
So I noticed that, yeah, the Orange Theory is going in.
It starts, grand openings Friday.
They don't sell smoothies?
Nope.
All right, next.
They monitor your heart rate.
Once again, this
Tired.
was just a informational item that we're gonna be bringing to you regularly.
Yep.
This is a development project timeline, and Akita in our office does this. So this is,
We saw this a month ago.
I don't believe, let's
Brad in
see.
Washington.
Oh yeah, Broad and Washington was updated, final action.
It's reopened as LPIC.
It's always
But it still has
blazing
all this
hot.
stuff.
So it's, you know, it's basically showing you stages where the major projects are. So it's sort of a different way of sort of looking at it, so.
Yes, I think this is really helpful.
Oh, that's what I'm wondering.
And then
Tom,
finally was the planning commission schedule as well as council coordinating and schedule. As you know, you're getting your package a week early now, and we're,
Started on an easy one.
yeah, so so we're having to do the agenda much sooner, a week in advance with the chair, and posting items a week in advance. So, you know, so far, so good. We're still getting used to it too. And I think the coordination with council and their scheduling is a little more problematic, and so we've written some correspondence, and we're continuing to talk to the manager and with the mayor, so we'll see how that goes, and if we need some more assistance, we'll
Yeah,
let
there's
you
very
know.
little for us to adapt to. I've talked with Paul about this. It's really on the council. I mean, it doesn't change our meeting times, how we deal with things. I mean, other than that, we'll have work sessions on one topic versus another.
Yeah.
But it's whether the council will agree to it. But
Yeah, so,
makes sense to me. I'm happy to go down this road if they're willing to accommodate it. I don't know why they wouldn't, but
Yeah.
just other than that, it's a change, big change.
so that was all for the director's report. Let's see, Paul was on vacation for a week, so it was covered for him.
Joy.
All right.
Development project type timeline is very helpful.
Good, glad.
Yeah.
Something new that we're doing.
I know.
So
Legal
I
process.
believe that concludes our meeting. Any other comments or questions before we adjourn?
We did have this memo about the city council planning commission schedules, but I don't.
We just did.
Oh, I didn't hear you
Yeah.
telling me, so I'm sorry.
I had a big monologue and speech.
Yeah.
You did not have a monologue.
I did.
I ripped for about 5-10 minutes.
Sorry.
I had a slide presentation.
I heard it.
No, I mean,
that
I read the
that
memo.
just to us,
I have
not
no
that,
questions.
not
It made
us to
sense
them.
to
I
me.
heard that.
Continue to talk to Paul, but it's on the city council, really.
Yeah, okay. It made sense to me, okay, but it seemed very complicated.
No other comments? Great. We're adjourned.
Okay, we're adjourned.